Focus, dude. Dude. Oh, he lives. Hey, dude!
But how do we get them in there? You'll see. When I give the word, hit the power switch.
In movies, they're the laid-back, cruisy surfer dudes or crime-fighting ninjas. But when it comes to real turtles, apparently it's the latter which is the more realistic representation.
I have watched a turtle go up and over a metre-high netting fence.
But when people purchase the reptile, which at infancy is the size of a 50-cent coin, they're often unaware of just how big their cute pet will get, how long it will live, and what their personalities are really like.
What we know, though, is that these animals live for several decades. They get to the size of a dinner plate. They can get pretty snappy and not really very friendly.
They can climb out of the water and grab a bird's eggs, lizards, frogs, geckos, anything that they can find, and they can drag it into the water and basically drown and eat it.
Kia ora, I'm Davina Zimmer, and today on The Detail, the number of turtles being found in streams and waterways across New Zealand has been steadily increasing over the years. And it's an issue concerning even the biggest turtle fans, because despite their cute, calm appearance, turtles are a pest, and when let loose, they wreak havoc on the environment.
They're quite aggressive, so when you've got, for example, a native bird that might be building its nest in a wetland area, the turtles might think, oh, that's a really nice sunny spot that I can sun myself in, and be quite aggressive and really sort of boot that bird off its nest, and obviously that's not good for the nesting birds.
In Auckland, the problem got so bad that in 2022 the council decided to ban the sale of certain turtle breeds. Imogen Bassett is the head of Natural Environmental Specialist Services at Auckland Council, and later in the podcast we'll hear more from her about why having turtles in the wild is such a bad thing and whether or not Auckland's ban is working. But we begin further south in Christchurch with Donna Moot. She founded Turtle Rescue almost 2 decades ago, and these days has 70 to 80 turtles in her care at any given time. Initially, pet turtles may have struggled to survive in the wild, but Donna says that's no longer the case.
They were often quite sickly, they were often a bit smaller and often would have pneumonia, things like that. Whereas now I'm getting a lot more larger adult turtles, particularly females, and they're very strong and resilient. And I know that Amber, she was, I think it was 3 years, she was living out under a bridge somewhere in Amberley, and Doc spent about 3 years trying to catch her. And when she came, she was passing grey fur, so she'd either eaten a cat or a rabbit, something like that.
So turtles eating a rabbit? Sorry, I thought I was under the impression that they were vegetarians, but are they carnivores?
No, they're not at all. No, they're fish eating. So they live in fresh water. So anything that's in the water or that they can catch and drag into the water, they will eat, because they don't actually make saliva. So they must be in the water to eat, to swish the water through their mouths. And they can climb out of the water and grab a bird. They can grab birds' eggs, lizards, frogs, geckos, anything that they can find, and they can drag it into the water and basically drown and eat it. I know of a situation where some people actually had a pet possum living in an enclosure with their couple of pet turtles, and they actually ate the possum. Right. So they're very strong, and they've got mouths like a bird's beak. And if you're talking about a turtle which has a 30 centimetre shell length, plus then a head which is, the size of a child's fist, with a really strong bite, no teeth because it's like a bird's beak. But if you get 3 or 4 of them grabbing onto something, they're absolutely going to devour it. Mm.
And is that the issue with people releasing pet turtles into the wild?
Yeah, the fact that they're getting into the wild, and of course that they want to survive, so they're going to find anything they can to eat, and that might be baby eels, it might be fish, it certainly is some greens, there'll be some watercress and duckweed and things like that devoured, but anything else they can get, they will be getting it for food.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you think of turtles, we have this impression that they're these slow-moving, lazy kind of characters, but the way that you're describing it sounds completely opposite.
And it absolutely is. And that's why sometimes they're escaping getting out there in the wild, because people may set them up in a pond, which is great. If you have a good-sized pond with, lots of natural food in it, water snails, garden worms. They love garden worms and garden snails. You can throw them in for them. And you've got some greens growing in there, and they're in a lovely pond, and they can access, a basking area to dry out and bask in the sun. But if it's not fenced, no matter how good your pond is, they will go, they will disappear, they will find their way to a waterway or a road, unfortunately, and other places like that. And I've known turtles, I have watched a turtle go up and over a metre high netting fence. They can get out of an enclosure if it's not a smooth fence. They can climb up bushes and things like that, or grasses, to actually get to the top of a fence to climb over. I've watched a turtle go out a cat door. People should know that when their 8-year-old demands that turtle and they trot off to the pet shop or get it off Trade Me or whatever, that turtle is still going to be alive when their 8-year-old is 58. And is that child and that parent prepared to look after that turtle properly for 50 plus years? And if they only live 10 years, well, then you're obviously doing something wrong. And there's, you need a huge tank. You need at least 120 centimetre long tank, even for your tiny little 50 cent piece sized baby. You need a large amount of water. You need to be changing that water every single week, or some of it. You need a really good canister filter that you're cleaning every year. You need proper lights, because you have to create sunlight for a turtle. A turtle's shell is its skeleton. And so in the wild, of course, they're getting sunlight, which is helping them absorb calcium, vitamin D, all those things like you and I need in the sun. But inside, you have to create that with a proper UVB bulb that you need to be changing every 6 to 12 months, plus a heat lamp, because you're creating sunlight, which is both UV and warmth. So you need to give them the proper calcium-rich food, not cat and dog food, because the calcium-phosphorus ratio is wrong. You can't be feeding them red meat and bananas and things. Turtles don't climb out of the water and eat cows. They don't climb banana trees. You need proper turtle food, which is high calcium rich food. And you need to be able to look after this turtle properly for 50 plus years. And if you're not prepared to do that, just don't get one.
The way that you're explaining it, it sounds like they're a massive commitment for anyone to have as a pet. Should we even be allowed to keep these kinds of animals, these reptiles, as pets?
It's a really good question, and I think that we absolutely should. We're seeing far more interest in exotic pets. You're seeing the bearded dragons, you're seeing the leopard geckos, all this kind of thing, and people are really interested in exotic pets and different things. But it's the same with any animal. I mean, it happens with our cats and our dogs and our rabbits. People overbreed, they get too many, they put themselves in a position where they're not sure how to look after it, and it ends up in a rescue. And it's exactly the same now with the reptiles.
And while sanctuaries like Donna's are built on the premise of taking in unwanted pets, they have their limits.
So the issue is that sanctuaries, the rescues around the country, and they're few and far between, they are completely overrun with unwanted pet turtles. And myself, how much longer can I keep doing this? I've been doing it for 20 years now. I actually turned 65 in November. It's a huge amount of work for me with the tanks, the ponds that I have at home, looking after all these turtles adequately, and all the hours I spend doing admin stuff, answering people's questions, helping them learn how to look after their turtle, helping them when their turtle is unwell because they were given the incorrect or no information, and so now their turtle is sick and they're asking me for information. So I'm doing all this stuff off my own bat with no funding, apart from I have to say the SPCA, when stray turtles come in, SPCA Canterbury here is great because they do help fund vet bills and that for that initial 8-day hold period, which is great. But, I'm overrun with turtles that I can't get into adequate homes.
Turtles, they are causing havoc in our native ecosystem, specifically red-eared slider turtles. And so the Auckland region has decided to do something about it.
So some parts of the country are resorting to either banning or putting them on the pest list. What do you think the solution is?
To be honest, the solution is the breeders who are selling off those tiny, cute little baby turtles by the hundreds on Trade Me for $40 and popping them in the post and sending them all over the country with very little information, saying buy 2 or 3 because they need company, which is not the correct at all because they're territorial reptiles and they fight. And people are getting these tiny, cute little baby turtles and they're living 50 to 70 years, depending on the species. And people just don't get enough information. If the breeders were stopped or decreased the number that they could sell, that would have a huge impact on the turtles that are being released. And there needs to be also lots more education to the general public because, as you say, people think they're slow-moving little things that don't do any damage, and they're not. They're fast. They can run away from you. If you're chasing a turtle, it can be quite hard to catch sometimes.
3 years ago, Auckland Council banned the sale of 3 breeds of turtles: red-eared sliders, cumberlands and snake necks.
So we know that red-eared sliders have got a really bad track record around the world of being very invasive. So they've been listed one of the world's 100 worst invasive species because they've invaded so many other countries. And really that's because they're so popular.
Imogen Bassett heads the Natural Environment Specialist Services at Auckland Council.
So we know that the pet trade internationally is one of the leading causes of new vertebrate invasions, and basically the more we sell of something, the more likely it is to become invasive because there are going to be more people buying it, more people who find that they can't look after it properly, and then they get dumped into the wild. So red-eared sliders, we know that they're a problem internationally. We also know that they're the most popular pet turtle in Aotearoa. We also know that they can breed, and so that's a key thing, is that we're worried about things where there's a climate match, and so we have evidence that red-eared sliders can reproduce in the wild as well. That's the case too for snake-necked turtles, so they're actually a better climate match to Auckland than the red-eared sliders are, and so that's why we're worried about them as well.
What does the climate have to do with the breeding of the turtles?
So we know that turtles have got a really interesting breeding biology. So just like our tuatara, their breeding is dependent on the temperature of the environment. And so at certain temperatures, you'll only get males being produced. At other temperatures, you'll only get females produced if it got a lot warmer. And then in the middle, there's what they call the Goldilocks zone, where you can get both males and females. So we know that as the climate warms, we're more likely to get that breeding happening here.
Right, and so is that the concern now as opposed to maybe 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing that. So we've got a lot more evidence of turtles breeding around the country than we did, for example, 10 years ago. I think the other thing is just the accumulation of what we call that propagill pressure, just the sheer number of them out there, that more people have bought them over the last 10 years, and so we're just seeing that accumulation of dumped turtles. So a lot of the ones we're seeing in the wild, they didn't breed there, but people just are unable to look after them and haven't done the right thing, and they've let them go into the wild.
And so what does the ban actually entail? So how is it enforced? So what happens? Tell me a bit about that.
The ban is on breeding and sale, and so our focus is particularly on that commercial side of things. So we have inspectors who go around pet stores and breeders and make sure that they're aware of it and they're complying with it. And so we've seen a really good uptake over that 3 years since that ban's come in, that people really want to do the right thing, and a lot of pet stores will tell you they don't want to be selling things that are invasive, so they're really on board with that.
But while the ban stops pet stores in the region from selling these kinds of turtles, it's tricky to put a stop to online trading.
It's really challenging to implement a regional ban with online trade, because people can readily get animals from online sources, not just Trade Me, and bring them into Auckland. So that's why we certainly would feel that a national ban would make things easier to implement.
Are there fines for people who breach?
No, we don't have fines, but we implement a policy of taking down sales and removing them from distribution.
Okay. When turtles get into the wild, from an environmental perspective, what's the damage?
I guess we're all aware of how damaging things like possums have been when you introduce, for example, mammals into a country that has no native land mammals apart from bats. And it's a very similar analogy with the turtle. So we don't have native turtles. Our environment's just not adapted to their species. And we know that they're omnivores, so they'll eat a whole range of different things, small insects, plants, things that are in our freshwater environments. They're also quite aggressive, so they'll, for example, boot native birds off their nesting sites or where the turtles might be wanting to sun themselves, but it's also actually where the birds want to lay their eggs. So there's a real sort of interference competition happening. We also know that when they're feeding and active in the water, they're really churning up the sediment on the bottom, so they can make the water much more murky and yuck. And we know that our freshwater environments, our lakes and rivers, are already under a lot of pressure from a whole range of issues, and so this is just one extra strain that they really don't need.
And like Imogen said, the turtles found in the wild are mostly pets that have been released, but there is evidence of successful breeding.
We definitely know of a number of situations where there have been wild-born turtles, and in some areas, repeatedly quite a few young taken out of that same area. Yeah.
And I've read, and Donna talked about this as well, is that they're difficult to catch. She spoke about Doc down south spending 3 years trying to catch this one turtle, which seems very bizarre because whenever, you see them in cartoons and in movies, they're these slow-moving, kind of lazy characters. Why are they so difficult to catch?
Yeah, well, I think to some extent people confuse turtles and tortoises. So your tortoise, this your archetypal slow mover, but also, turtles... Yeah, they don't have a reputation for being speedy, but actually you see them sitting on a rock or a log sunning themselves, but as soon as they sense danger, plop, they're gone into the water and that's it. You're not going to see them again. And one of the things is that they're really, really adapted to low oxygen environments, so that means they can stay under the water for a really long time. Maybe about half an hour they can be rocking around under the water doing their thing and not coming up for air. So they can get a long way away and you just don't know where they're going to come back up again. And if they're going to sleep, if they're sort of hibernating under that water, then they can actually be down there for hours. The other thing I think that makes it really tricky is that we just don't have good tools for detecting them and for controlling them. So things like possums, as a country we've spent several decades now investing a lot of time and money in working out how to get really good at finding and catching possums, but we just haven't had that kind of investment in turtles. Possums and stoats have been around in our environment for many, many decades now, and we've had time to watch them spread around the country, see the full extent of the damage that has been done, and then kind of collectively react and go, oh, actually, if we don't do something, then this is really terrible, right? And so with turtles, that's just, we're at the beginning of that process, and we're really just sort of signalling the warning sign that, we can see this starting to happen again, and we can see that the future is pretty grim if we don't act now, but we've got an opportunity to learn from those mistakes and really prevent it getting that bad this time around.
Do you see that action happening? I mean, I know in Auckland we've got the ban, but do you see enough action happening?
I think there's a lot more awareness in this space than there was 10 years ago. I think people are really starting to switch on to the idea that whenever we have a pet, we're making a decision generally to have a species which isn't native to this country, and we need to think really carefully about whether we can look after it, whether we're going to be able to contain it properly and not let it go outside, those sorts of things. So I think that's much, much different awareness than it was 10 years ago.
The issue of pet turtles ending up in the wild and causing havoc isn't new. Environmentalists have been voicing their concerns for a number of years, with some calling for the pet-turned-pest to be added to the National Pest-Pet Biosecurity Accord.
It's an agreement between the Ministry for Primary Industries, so their biosecurity function, they're the lead agency for this, and also the Pet Industry Association and the Regional Council sector. And so we've signed up to this as regional councils to say, yeah, we want to be around the table, we want to be working together to try to prevent these sorts of problems. And so there's an equivalent one in the plant space, which has been active for a number of years, National Pest Plant Accord, and that's where the nursery industry and councils and central government get together and look at what plants should maybe be banned from sale across the whole country. And so the idea behind the Pet Accord was to have the same kind of thing where we have a nationally consistent approach to regulating the trade of pets.
And so what does it take for a pet to be put on that list?
That's a good question, because no pets have been put on this list yet. So
is it a list with no list?
It is a list with no list, that's right. So the theory behind this is that we assess what species are high risk and which would benefit from that kind of national approach to regulation, and then we put them on the list, and they can be sort of gazetted under the Biosecurity Act by the Ministry for Primary Industries as a result of that. We haven't had anything go through that list yet, but regional sector absolutely really keen to see some nationally coordinated regulation in the space. We'd actually be really keen to see a national pest management plan that brings together that regulation of trade, breeding, responsible pet ownership, advocacy, and where appropriate coordinated incursion response work to really make sure that collectively we're doing the most that we can to prevent this kind of problem emerging.
So, the million-dollar question is, will turtles be the first pet to go on that list?
I don't have a crystal ball, but I absolutely think that they are one of the species that has got the greatest awareness that this is a really, really pressing issue, and so I think they'll be right up there on people's list to be advocating for.
And that wraps up another week of The Detail, a newsroom production supported by RNZ and NZ On Air. This episode was engineered by Jeremy Ansell and produced by Gwen McClure. Thank you to Donna Moot and Imogen Bassett for joining me, Davina Zimmer. Have a great weekend. We'll be back in your ears Monday. Ka kite anō.